mastered the 95%. But after a good qualifying lap, you are still wondering to yourself, why the heck am I still 1 second slower than the fast guys? And the answer simply isn't a secret line they are driving or a magic setup that they have. No, it all comes down to driving technique. The final 5%, the small things you do with your feet and with your hands, that will allow you to push the limits of the tires and the car at all times. My name is OSW-Sim-Sports and I have been sim racing for the last 20 years. In that time I have become an LFM Top 100 driver, but the thing I am most proud of is that I have coached and helped many people take their first steps in sim racing. And I am simply obsessed with anything that has to do with four wheels. And that also means that I check out content from other creators, and that's why I know the tricks that you see online. And why 95% of them will slow you down if you don't apply them correctly. And this blog will be your roadmap to the deep end, where we will be breaking down line optimization, braking technique, throttle rotation, and all of the small little stuff really quick drivers do in order to achieve those lap times. This is block 3, let's get into it. Blocks 1 and 2 gave you 95% of the pace, vision, markers, smooth inputs and consistency. But in this block we are going over the small stuff, the tricks and techniques other YouTubers love to obsess on and make seem like this is the thing that will take you to the next level. And I will admit that there is some truth to that. However, the reality is that each track, each car will require a different set of tricks, and some will overlap and be similar, but some won't. And that is what today is for. Forming your own bag of tricks and techniques and making them natural in execution. Understanding when and why they work, and not just this one trick will make you the next Suelio Almeida or James Baldwin. These techniques will unlock the final 5%. And they are the things that the top runners focus and obsess on. And it's how they are able to set seemingly unimaginable lap times. But they come at a price. A price that is very easy to underestimate when you are watching an Aliens hot lap video. But here's the thing. These techniques are in block 3 for a reason. For this block, I will be assuming that you can find your markers and that you have your fundamentals down to a level where you can drive quickly and consistently, and you have mental capacity to spare. As a quick example, it's extremely difficult to manage throttle rotation if your inputs are still jerky and inconsistent. There's absolutely no shame in going back, watching the older videos and practicing a little bit more. But if you are confident that you are ready, let's get into it. And I already hinted at it, but the amount of brain processing power that you have available changes dramatically depending on what you are doing. In a race, you need bandwidth for battling, strategy, tire management, avoiding incidents, managing fuel, and your brain is constantly split between driving fast and everything else that comes with racing. But if you are on a track by yourself, either in a practice session or in a qualifying session, there is much more capacity available to think about actually executing the perfect lap. And this is also why qualifying and racing will require different techniques and will require a different mental approach. Qualifying is about nailing a single lap, maximizing every inch of the track, using and abusing all the tire has to offer in that moment, and simply taking more risk to squeeze out every millisecond of lap time your car has to offer. You can afford to dedicate your full mental capacity to braking perfectly, managing throttle rotation, and hitting every apex perfectly, because in that moment that is all you are thinking about. And then compare it with racing, where the main goal is to go as quick as possible over multiple laps or a set amount of time, making sure not to get too many off-track warnings, ensuring the tire can make it to the end, and most importantly, that the car makes it to the finish line. And as a result, you simply won't have the bandwidth to execute, or at least think about executing every technique perfectly on every lap when you are also managing a battle. So the goal will be to make these techniques natural through practice, not a list of things you have to do. That way you will know when to use them, and they will work for you even when your brain is busy doing other things. And here is something that is a bit misleading at first. No universal fast technique works everywhere. Each car has different characteristics that will respond differently to inputs. And understanding this will save you countless hours of frustration trying to copy what works for someone else in a completely different car. And what works in a prototype or formula car might not work in a touring car, and vice versa. To be fast, you want to overcome the car's weaknesses and abuse the car's strengths. But even within a class, each car has its own character and strengths. A front-engine BMW will drive very differently to a McLaren GT3, despite both being GT3 cars. And then there are four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive and front-wheel drive cars too, with each of them having their own set of unique characteristics and quirks. So, what is it that creates these different characteristics? Why does a BMW drive differently to a McLaren? Or a better question, why does a front-engine car behave completely differently to a mid-engine one? And it all boils down to two simple, fundamental questions about any car you will ever drive. A car is literally the sum of its parts. And while there are countless factors that affect how a car drives, the two most important questions you need to ask about any car are: where is the engine and which wheels are driven? The engine is the heaviest part of the car, and it largely decides the weight balance of the car as a whole, which fundamentally changes how it behaves through corners. A front-engine car will very often have a front-biased weight balance as well. And if this is the case, the front tires will have to do more work to rotate the car through a corner than the rear wheels. And as a result, this configuration often suffers from corner entry and mid-corner understeer. And a mid-engine layout is for car nerds often the golden standard, because this layout is chosen most of the time to achieve a perfect 50-50 front-to-rear weight balance. As a result, to rotate the car through a corner, each tire will have to do roughly the same amount of work. A rear-engine car is more rare, but Porsche specifically has fully embraced this layout, and this was also the layout of choice in Formula 1 for a while. And a rear-engine car can still have a 50-50 weight balance, but as the engine is in the back, the fuel tank has to be in the front. So, as you are driving a stint, you might suddenly start noticing differences in the handling characteristics of the car, with the car becoming more understeery as the tank empties. With a normal tank load, on corner entry and mid-corner you can be extremely aggressive with these cars. Oh, the understeer! But on corner exit you have to watch out for push understeer. Most circuit racing cars are rear-wheel drive, which means that they are prone to spinning on throttle in corner exits, especially without traction control. As the rear wheels start spinning on acceleration, less grip is available for side-to-side grip, or in other words, resisting lateral forces. And as a result, if this is not controlled by the driver, the rear of the car will slide out more and more until it fully spins. But a skilled driver will be able to control this on-throttle slide to get more rotation, meaning they can carry more speed through the corner while still keeping the car within the track. Most production cars are front-wheel drive, mainly because of the cost of the drivetrain being lower. But as a result, there are also quite a few front-wheel driven racing cars. And among these famously are touring cars, because they have to be somewhat based on their production counterparts. Also in the lower WRC classes, front-wheel drive cars are very common. And front-wheel drive cars have the opposite behavior to a rear-wheel drive car. And instead of the wheels being pushed, Now they are being pulled, because the front wheels have to do the work of both steering the car and pulling the car under acceleration. The steering response during this moment can feel very numb, unresponsive and understeery. And worst of all, if you don't handle it correctly, you are scribbing off speed that you ideally want to carry through the corner. As a result, front-wheel drive have an inherent weakness of on-throttle understeer, which in racing nerd vernacular we call torque steer. Older all-wheel drive systems often suffer from inherent understeer in every stage of the corner. But with electronically controlled diffs, hybrid systems and a ton of setup wizardry, these shortcomings can be pretty much overcome to the point that they are barely a weakness. In low traction conditions, such as the loose surfaces during rally stages, all-wheel drive has very obvious advantages. With 4 wheels pushing or pulling the car instead of 2, there is simply more grip available to accelerate the hunk of metal. But because of this difference in traction and acceleration, racing series often have a hard time balancing the performance of cars like the Nissan Skyline GTR, the Audi Quattro BTCC, and a bunch of others over the years, and the race organizers will try adding more and more weight ballast to the point where the all-wheel drive cars are moving obstacles in the corners and rockets on the straight, and that simply doesn't make for great racing. Many series are now either dominated by all-wheel drive systems like Rally and Rallycross, while in most circuit racing classes it is fully banned. And as this video is not about rallying, I will not be further covering all-wheel drive systems in the rest of this video. Now, before we dive into the techniques themselves, just a very quick reminder, this course is completely free. No sponsors, no ads, 0 hidden costs and no registration required. In a world full of grifters selling overpriced courses that will promise you that you will be the next Max Verstappen after watching just 3 quick videos, I am giving you a complete, structured course for free. If you know a friend or family member that wants to learn sim racing too and wants to do it in a structured way, please share this course with them. The more people that join our sim racing hobby, the better. Whether you are racing in LMU, iRacing, Race Room, Assetto Corsa or any other sim, whether you are on a controller or a top-of-the-line direct drive setup, the techniques in this block are pretty much universal. They work because they are based on physics and how cars actually behave, and not just one magic trick that will work with just one car on one specific game. No, I'm just kidding. But let's actually stay with understeer and oversteer for now, because it is a very important topic. Let's use this bell curve as a visual guide, where in both of the Top Gear scenarios, the car either had so much understeer that it just went straight, or so much oversteer that it would just spin out whenever you turn the wheel. But in both of these scenarios, the car would be undrivable to a point where it would be legit impossible for us to extract any pace from it. But if the car is set up right and handles well, by employing various driver techniques and tricks, we can manipulate the car into giving a little bit of oversteer or a little bit of understeer whenever it suits us. And that is for a big part what driving technique is all about. Manipulating the vehicle dynamics in order to get the car to do what you want. Having a bit of understeer will make our steering feel less responsive, and as a result, the car will feel a bit more stable, which can sometimes be a benefit. Having a bit of oversteer will make the car want to turn or rotate more, and that will also make the car more sensitive to your inputs, where each little bit of steering lock and throttle you add, the pendulum will swing more and more. Or rather, the rear wheels will start overtaking the front wheels. And so a lot of actually going fast is about manipulating understeer and oversteer in the moments that it suits you. And it also helps a lot to understand a little bit about vehicle dynamics, especially how the weight distribution of the car moves with the inputs you are making during driving. The easiest to imagine are braking and acceleration, where the weight goes forward for braking and rearward for acceleration. But if we are turning left, the weight of the car will shift to the right on the outside tires, and vice versa. If we are turning to the right, the weight will shift to the left, also on the outside tires. And with that we can deduce which tire is most loaded, because if we are turning left and we are accelerating, the weight will be on the rear right, and vice versa. If we are turning right and braking hard, the weight will be on the front left. A tire can only do so much total work. It has a finite amount of grip available, and that grip has to be split between all the forces acting on the wheel: braking, accelerating and turning. And understanding this is the key to unlocking why certain techniques work and others don't. And to get an idea of what forces the tires are actually experiencing, you can either look at a G-force sensor reading, or if you have recorded your telemetry, you can look at a scatter plot. But even that is not required. Once you start building an understanding for the car, you will just slowly start building up a natural feeling of how much can I trill my brakes into the corner without locking up or spinning. You just need to understand that the tires on the car have a shared responsibility: longitudinal forces for acceleration and braking, and lateral forces for its sideways grip and for turning. If you want to brake as quickly as possible, you want the tires to be only braking. And if you want to accelerate as fast as possible, you want the tires to be only focused on that. So in those scenarios, going in a straight line is preferable. And the trade-off principle is actually quite simple. If you are using 100% of the tire's grip for braking, you will have 0% left for turning. The car just won't rotate at all.
6 left and 5 right long, 100.
And the same applies in reverse. If you are using all of the grip of the tire for turning, you cannot add any throttle or braking, or most likely the car will spin out. If you are braking while the car is still turning, you are asking the tires to do 2 jobs at once, and they simply cannot do both at maximum capacity. But this is also the reason why trail braking towards the apex works, where the moment you actually stop braking fully and turn into the corner, there is most likely still grip left in the tire. But if we are trail braking, we are deliberately managing the balance between braking and turning forces, trying to keep the tire loaded and working optimally throughout all of the corner, and not just braking or entry. And as this is a balance, as you add more steering angle, you reduce the brake pressure and vice versa. You are keeping the tires loaded and working, but not asking of them to exceed their total available grip. The following is taken from a previous tutorial I made about setting up aerodynamics on a car. But this part does explain the relationship between the car weight, the tire load and the amount of grip the car has available quite well. Simply put, more vertical load on the tire, so pushing down on the tire equals more friction, which equals more grip. A quick test you can do yourself is moving your finger across a surface while pushing very lightly, and then once again pushing very hard, and then just feeling the difference in friction that it generates. Now, to get a better idea of the tire loads on a real car, in a almost static scenario like very slow speed, we just take the weight of the car, and if the car has a 50-50 weight distribution like this Ferrari, we can just divide it by 4. And thus we can say in this scenario there is 312.5 kilograms or 688 pounds pushing down on the tire. So how do we add more load to the tires without adding more weight? Downforce, of course. While I'm using GT3 cars here as an example, I want to make it as clear as possible that this pretty much applies to all modern race cars. Now, these are just estimates of course, but at 240 km an hour or 150 miles per hour, the downforce pushing down on the car is around 1625 kilograms or 3600 pounds. Which is of course in addition to the car weight. So if we add those two up and divide it by 4 again, we can see that at high speeds the car is now generating more than double the tire loads, which accounts for a 40 to 60% increase in overall grip. But of course this video is not about setting up a car, but about driving technique. But luckily the dive, squat and roll we put on our car still has a big impact on the weight transfer and as a result on which tires are loaded. And most likely you will have made at least one very sudden stop in a passenger car in your life. Most likely you can just intuitively imagine how violent the weight transfer forward actually is when braking in a race car. Let's say you're driving a car in a simulator and you're trying to sense in the force feedback where the limit of the car is. If the force feedback is good, we will be very accurately able to judge this. But that leaves us with a question. How the heck are we able to judge the grip levels in our tires? By simply feeling and interpreting the forces that we feel in our steering wheel. And on top of that, how the heck does that even work in real life? And simply put, what you feel in your steering wheel comes from the tire deforming and twisting the contact area of the tire. And because just like a spring, the tire will want to resist this deformation. So as we are driving in a straight line, once we slowly start steering the wheel, the tire contact patch will start twisting more and more. As you steer more and more, you will feel the steering wheel becoming heavier and heavier. Because as you put on more steering angle, the tire will deform and twist more and more. This results in more and more force coming from the tires wanting to center themselves again. And because the front wheels are connected to our steering wheel, this is the force we feel. And this is why we call it self-aligning torque. But as you find the limit of the grip, if you push through it, we feel the steering wheel becoming lighter and lighter. And that is because the tires at this point are already fully deformed and is now under so much stress that it is no longer able to provide optimal levels of grip. And how much the tire is now twisting from its original direction is what we call the tire slip angle. And so what you are actually feeling through your steering wheel are the resistive forces we call self-aligning torque, which increases or decreases with the amount of slip angle we put on the tire, and we can control the amount of slip angle the tire is experiencing with our steering wheel. And because we know the steering wheel gets heavier and heavier until it reaches peak grip, and after it reaches peak grip it will get lighter and lighter if we just push through it. And so in a mid-corner situation where you are trying to find the optimal level of grip, this is actually what you are doing. We are trying to judge and interpret the forces we feel from our steering wheel in order to find the optimal level of grip at the optimal slip angle. Let's say we are driving in a straight line at 60 km an hour. And we know the exact angle of our steering wheel in order to get the maximum amount of grip at this speed. Let's say it's 10 degrees. Now, in order to turn as fast as possible, do we want to go from 0 to 10 degrees in an instant, like we are driving on the keyboard? Or do we want to go from 0 degrees to 10 degrees in a smooth, progressive manner? And in 99.99999% of the cases, it will be the latter. And that is because we are giving the car a chance to pitch and roll before we put on full steering lock, and as a result we are more progressively loading the tire and not just overwhelming it in an instant. And by doing this it will be able to provide more grip, but something other driver coaches often fail to mention is that of course we need a little bit of time to interpret and feel the force feedback as well. We are still humans after all. And this is the slow hands principle, where to go quick you don't really want to be super flashy and super quick on the steering wheel. You want to be smooth and precise. And now let's discuss another simplified analogy driving coaches love to use, and it's the quote-unquote string theory. Now please don't run away expecting complicated math, because there will be no math involved. Just imagine you have a string tied from your right foot, the foot you do your throttle with. And that string is tied to both ends of your steering wheel. In this situation, if you are full throttle and you start steering the steering wheel, The steering will start pulling your feet away from the throttle pedal, and as a result you are progressively releasing the throttle as you are putting on more steering lock. And the only way to put on more throttle again is to release your steering lock. And I personally find this a bit of a convoluted analogy to use for simply explaining the fact that you will need to release your throttle pedal when you are steering in, and that you will need to release your steering angle when you are putting throttle on the car. It's not that deep, bro. And so now that we know about using and interpreting self-aligning forces in the wheel to actually find optimal levels of grip, now we can use this information to save ourselves from death if we need it. Once the car actually starts sliding, or rather oversteering, the self-aligning forces in our steering wheel will try to guide us to a steering angle where the car is now more neutral or more balanced again, and depending on how severe the slide is, this will either be full opposite lock or just a minor correction on your steering wheel. And this is of course what drifting is all about. So if you are struggling with this, I highly recommend to just go practice some drifting. Sadly, car control cannot be taught in a structured format like the rest of this course. It's something that you build up naturally over hundreds or even thousands of laps. Each time you make a mistake, catch a slide, or narrowly avoid a barrier, you're just adding to your internal library of "oh shit" moments and how to deal with them. The problem is, I can't give you a step-by-step guide for every possible scenario, because car control is pure instinct and feel developed through experience. But here's why car control still matters a lot. Car control will be your insurance policy. It's the skill that turns a race-ending crash into a close call, the ability that keeps you out of the barriers when someone punches you mid-corner, or a save you make in your qualifying lap when you hit a bump and the rear suddenly steps out. Rally drivers have the best car control in the world, by a mile, and there's a reason for that. They are constantly operating at the limit on surfaces that change every corner. And car control is something that you will develop naturally over time. But if you want to speed up this process massively, you need to deliberately expose yourself to more situations where the car is actually misbehaving. Try some rally games, try drifting in Assetto Corsa, or maybe even try some Gymkhana, special stages and obstacle courses. And it is this hard in your throat, code brown, adrenaline pumping stuff that won't always make you quicker on a perfect lap, but when things go wrong, and they will, you gotta put throttle to not die in these cars. Car control is what keeps you in the race instead of watching from the pits. Imagine the perfect robot driver. This robot always drives within the exact limits of what the car is capable of. It never ever makes mistakes, never needs to catch slides, and it never locks up. At that level of perfection, car control becomes almost irrelevant for going fast. Circuit racing rewards the robot who never needs saves over the hero who makes brilliant saves. Car control is what gets you through mistakes, but it won't necessarily make you faster. Technique will make you faster. And that comes at the cost we discussed before. And that is what the rest of this block is actually about. Not the exciting heroics of catching massive slides, but the systemic techniques that actually unlock lap time. In the next section, we will finally be addressing racing lines, stopping faster, getting more rotation through corners, and managing throttle application. Those aren't really sexy techniques. Nobody's making highlight reels of perfect braking technique, but these are the tricks that will find you those final few tenths. Not drifting and sliding your way around the track. But of course you already know that, because you are a... I promise this is not an ad or a sponsor segment, but if you wish to support me on my journey to create free educational sim racing content and do some racing of my own on the side, I have set up a Ko-Fi link, so you can choose to make a completely voluntary donation if you wish to support me, and any donation is of course greatly appreciated. Thank you in advance. And so here we are. Finally, it's time. We've been putting this off since block 1. Racing lines. And I think the best way to do so is to challenge one of the biggest misconceptions in sim racing. That the perfect racing line for a corner is always the same. And this seems strange at first, but it is crucial to understand. As we have already preluded to in the intro, if you watch an onboard hot lap from an alien in a GT3 and you try to replicate it in a prototype car, most likely you will just go slower. Because very often, when it comes to which line you are driving through a corner, the car is the bigger factor than the corner itself. Lower powered cars, like the Mazda MX-5, are momentum cars. They need to prioritize exit speed, but they also desperately need to carry as much momentum as possible through every phase of the corner. Any speed you lose takes forever to recover because you just don't have the power. So while it is true that you are often looking at later apexes to maximize your straight line acceleration, you're also trying to preserve every single bit of speed that you can carry through the corner. And high-powered, high-downforce cars like Formula cars completely change the equation. But not in the way most people think. In high-speed corners where the aero is working properly and generating massive downforce, these cars can carry so much more speed that a geometric line, a smooth, flowing arc, is often preferable. In those corners, you are simply using the downforce to maintain momentum through the entire sweep. But in low-speed corners, like hairpins, the dynamics flip again, because at those speeds, the aero isn't generating as much downforce anymore. And because hairpins are so tight, the car will simply have to shed almost all of its momentum just to make such a tight corner anyway. So, what do the fast guys do? They often overshoot the natural apex a little bit, get the car stopped and then rotate it very quickly, and then once it's pointing straight, they absolutely rocket out of the corner. And this is what the famous V-shaped line is about. They are spending less time waiting for the car to rotate mid-corner, and they can unleash that extreme acceleration of a Formula car earlier. The result? It's quicker, even though it looks more aggressive and it looks like they are overshooting their apex a little bit. And what we are essentially doing by changing our driving lines is changing where and how early in the corner we have our minimum speed point. Which of course is the moment in time where the car is going the slowest in the corner, and 99% of the time this will also be the moment just before you get back on the throttle. And if we are driving the smooth progressive line, most of the time the apex will be the minimum speed point. But if we are doing late apexes and V-style lines, we are essentially shifting this minimum speed point to before the apex so we can get back on the throttle earlier again. And this all is to say that the best or optimal line is simply the best compromise. Still a too tight line into last corner. Okay. The best compromise between corner entry, mid corner and corner exit, and how well you are able to execute on it. Whoa. Okay, I can carry more speed there. But nice exit. And I hope it is clear by now that this changes from car to car, corner to corner and condition to condition. So this is something that you will have to find out and judge for yourself. More patience, I have to be more patient. Just let it roll in the banking and then turn. Or go on throttle, I mean. You will only have to look like 5 minutes on a POV of my streams to find out that, yeah, that is basically 95% of the time what I'm doing. Trying to figure out how quick can I go in here, what's the best compromise, what's the best line, etc. Just doing experimentation on the fly. And this is of course a skill in of itself, so the more you do it, the better you will become at it. And now that you understand how the car will dictate your driving approach, let's talk about how the corner itself modifies that approach. Because even while the car is the bigger factor, the geometry of the corner of course still matters. Hairpins are the exception to almost every rule. Even in high-powered, high-downforce cars, you're usually looking at a late apex here. Why is that? Well, it's because most hairpins are so tight that you will be losing most of your momentum anyway. And the following straight is typically long enough that exit speed becomes everything. And fast sweepers are the opposite to these. These are all about the smooth arc and maintaining speed. You want to flow around these corners, keeping the car both loaded, settled and stable. Any disruption to your momentum here is expensive because you're carrying so much speed. Think of corners like Poelhon at Spa or the Porsche curves at Le Mans. The geometric line here often wins because you can spend more time on throttle. And then we have corners with a decreasing corner radius. And that is where patience will pay off. Think of Brooklands at Silverstone for example. These corners tighten up as you go through them, which means that if you turn in too early or you commit to an early apex, you will run out of track on exit. And another really good example is the South Bank at Brands Hatch. The technique here is a progressively later apex. You're essentially just waiting on the outside of the track and then turning in later than feels natural. It feels slow, but it's faster because you're not fighting the car at the exit. And corners with an increasing corner radius, meaning that they get less tight as you go through them, are the fun ones. They open up as you progress through them. This means you can commit earlier and just trust the car. As the corner opens up, you have more room to work with. So an early turn-in and an early apex often works well. In these corners, you will be rewarded for being aggressive and trusting that the geometry will give you the space that you need on exit. And then there are corner sequences, and this is where a little bit of strategy comes in. And sometimes the optimal line is a compromised line, where you are compromising the first part of the corner sequence in order to get a better run in the second part of the sequence, or vice versa. If corner 2 leads onto a long straight, like at Maggots and Beckett's at Silverstone, you might sacrifice your exit from corner 1 to get a better entry into corner 2, and this is where track knowledge and thinking in sections, not just individual corners, becomes crucial. Later in this blog, we will devote a bit more attention to complex corner sequences. Most likely, you have spent some hard currency to be able to drive the content that you have. So, allow yourself the luxury of enjoying everything the track has to offer, using all of the road and curbing on entry, if possible clipping a little bit of the apex and cutting a little bit that way, and using all of the width of the road on exit so you can go back on throttle nice and early. You paid for the damn track, so use it. Just this alone can cost you up to a second compared with aliens per lap. Even more maybe. And driving will just become easier if you actually do it. The corners will open up to you more, the lines will be easier to actually follow, and the car will be fighting you less. If this is something you are not already doing, make it your number one priority. One of the most common issues drivers face is simple. I cannot get the car stopped in time. You're watching an aliens replay and they're braking way later than you, but somehow still getting the car slowed down and turn in, while if you were to try it, you'd be sailing straight into the barrier. So, what's the secret here? We shall go over all of the braking techniques in this chapter, but it starts with understanding a fundamental principle, and I like to call it straight lining. And the concept is extremely simple. Brake as straight as possible, so the tire can focus on just stopping and not turning. Straight lining will work for every car on every track, as it is simply a fundamental rule. But to understand when we need to use more advanced braking techniques, we still need to understand a little bit more about the car we are driving. But before we even dive into trail braking, etc., we need to know one critical thing about our car. Does it have ABS, or an anti-lock braking system? Modern GT3 cars and most contemporary race cars that are built for gentleman racing will have ABS. Older cars, some Formula cars and many classic race cars do not. And the difference in technique is night and day. If your car has ABS, you can be aggressive. You can slam the brakes and the ABS vibration through the pedal will tell you exactly when you have found the limit of the tire's grip. And the feedback that you get back from your pedals and wheel about when the car is engaging with its ABS is absolute gold. It's how you threshold brake, where you are modulating your brake pressure just around that vibration to stay right at the limit without going too far over it. And because the ABS will save you in situations where you would otherwise spin, you can also use rapid fire downshifts to maximize engine braking, which is absolutely huge in cars like GT3s. Get the car straight, slam on the brake, slam through the gears and feel the ABS working. Modulate the pressure you are putting on your brake pedal around this limit and you can brake later and harder than you ever thought possible. But without ABS, everything changes. You must be gentle and progressive with your brake application. Too aggressive and you will lock up. And whether you will lock up the fronts and go straight or lock up the rears and spin out depends both on the dynamics of the car in that moment, but mostly the brake bias setting. And the real skill with braking is building a muscle memory relationship between the load on your brake pedal and how much brake force the car can handle at each corner and each scenario. We are trying to develop an internal database of this corner, this speed, this much pressure and the car will be fine. It's a field that takes time to develop. So if you have ever jumped from a GT3 or GT4 car into a prototype or Formula car and you just kept locking up the rears and spinning off the track, this is most likely the reason. You need to be more gentle with cars that don't have ABS. And in real life we solve this by cadence braking, which is kind of a pulsating modulation of the brake, which works extremely well in real life because we have the quote-unquote seat of pants feeling that will very accurately allow us to judge how much the car is actually braking or whether we are actually braking a little bit less because we are locking up. Our senses are extremely sensitive to this, but of course in the sim we have none of that. Maybe your brake pedal or your steering wheel will start vibrating a bit, but that's most of the time just it. So if we try to replicate cadence braking in the sim, very often we will just overshoot every time a little bit, locking up the tires, which will take a long time to recover again, making us just much slower as a result. As such, I would always recommend, in sim racing at least, to just be as smooth as possible. Smooth is good. In the previous chapter, we talked about how high downforce cars behave differently in high speed versus low speed corners. Well, that same principle creates a massive complication when it comes to braking. In high downforce cars, like prototypes and formulas, the problem is simple. As you slow down, you lose downforce. And as downforce bleeds off, the rear of the car is being pushed into the ground less and less. Meanwhile, the car is still pitching forward from braking, transferring weight to the front of the car. So you have got less aerodynamic load on the rear and more mechanical load on the front. The result? The rear tires are far more likely to lock up as you get slower. And if the rears lock up, you are spinning. And the technique to manage this as a driver is to feather off the brake pedal as your speed drops. You can brake very hard initially because you have downforce working for you. But as you slow down and the downforce disappears, you need to progressively release brake pressure. And this is not a step-by-step process you can just write down and memorize. It's something that you will have to feel through practice. The exact timing changes with every corner, every car, every condition. And the more experienced you will become, the faster you will be on the limit in that scenario. Low downforce or no downforce at all cars, like the MX-5, don't suffer from this nearly as much. Of course, the weight transfer still happens, but you are not dealing with the added complexity of aerodynamic load bleeding off as you slow down. As a result, the braking characteristics stay more consistent throughout the entire braking zone. And just as with the slow hands principle, we do not want to go from 0% braking to 100% braking pressure in an instant. All that will do is make the car dive or pitch forward very violently, potentially unsettling the car. Especially in cars without ABS, this matters a lot. Because once we load the front tires, we are unloading the rear tires. The rear tires will have less grip and will be more likely to lock up. And again, if the rear tires lock up, we are spinning out. So we are looking for a nice, smooth, progressive brake application that looks like a bell curve. Trail braking is feathering the brake while turning into the corner. A very simple concept, because trailing off the brakes when entering a corner just makes sense. But the execution and the reasons why it works are more nuanced than just I will be able to brake a little bit later. And here is the key to making trail braking work. It's brake bias and sometimes a little bit of ABS. But generally, brake bias will have the biggest effect on how the car behaves when you are trail braking. And getting it right is the difference between a tool that unlocks lap time for you and a technique that puts you into the barriers. If you have your brake bias set forwards, your car will brake more with the front wheels than with the rear wheels, and vice versa. If you have your brake bias set rearward, your car will brake more with the rear wheels than with the front wheels. And this will largely decide if the car is understeery or oversteery when trail braking. And we will get in depth in a second, but first there's one more little nuance. If your brake bias is too far forward, the car will pitch forward more during braking, loading the front tires even more than they already are. And since those front tires are already occupied with steering and braking, shifting the weight massively forward will just ask too much of the tire and you will just go straight. And if your brake bias is too far rearward, the rear wheels will lose grip under braking, and the car will have a tendency to rotate around the front wheels, spinning you out of the corner before you know what happened. But with a correct brake bias setting, something magical happens. You can very gently modulate the brake pressure around the corner as you are steering, to make micro corrections in your trajectory. If you have found the perfect brake bias setting, where the car wants to rotate and the line tightens when trailing, but we still have enough control to not lock up or spin, the brake pedal essentially becomes a second steering wheel. And having that second steering wheel will allow you to make corrections and follow lines and trajectories that would otherwise simply be impossible. And understanding why your braking pedal will become a second steering wheel once you have set your brake bias correctly is literally a question of balance. In 95% of the cases, in long and twisting corners, where trail braking is the most effective, you will essentially be front limited, meaning how quickly you can go is mostly dependent on how much grip your front tires actually have. Because as you can imagine, the front tires are already working hard to steer the car through the corner, so they are experiencing a lot of lateral forces, but you are also trail braking into the corner, meaning they also have to deal with longitudinal forces at the same time. But meanwhile, the rear of the car is doing way less work, which means that the rear tires have still more grip to offer us if we are able to extract it. And by shifting the brake bias rearward, you are asking the rear tires to do more of the braking work. And here is the key. When the rear tires are working harder, they have less lateral grip left over to resist sliding. And why does this work in our favor? Because we are more equally dividing both the lateral and longitudinal forces among the rear and front wheels. And instead of having the fronts just do 80% of the work and the rear wheels of the car just coasting along, now we are making both ends of the car contribute in the corner. And it is this balance that creates a small but controlled amount of oversteer on corner entry and mid-corner that helps the car turn more aggressively than it would if only the fronts are working hard. And a skilled driver can and will exploit this. You are deliberately creating an imbalance that makes the car rotate, and using that rotation to get through the corner faster. And here is the bonus of while trail braking works and not the main reason. You can also carry more speed into the corner than would otherwise be possible because you are still braking in the corner itself. Compared to the traditional brake and then turn in approach, trail braking will let you start braking later and then manage that extra speed as you are turning in. And it is those two benefits combined, rotation control and carrying more speed, that go hand in hand to give you a higher average speed while still making the corner. But what is the catch? Trail braking is super easy to overdo. Overslowing the car can hurt more than it will gain. And if you are not smooth with your inputs, it will induce snaps of oversteer that, if not very quickly corrected, will have you facing the wrong way. This is a technique that requires practice to build a feel for how much brake pressure, for how long, in which corners you have to do. And it is highly dependent on the conditions, the car, the setup, and how consistent you are in applying your technique. So, this will take a bit of practice, but once you have it in your tool bag, it is an extremely useful tool to actually combat mid-corner understeer. And now let's just break down a complete corner and go over the process of stopping as quickly as possible. As we already know, you want the car to be as straight as possible before even braking, so that once we actually start braking, the car can focus on just that. If the car has ABS, we very quickly go from 0 to 100% brake pressure. We start slamming down the gears, and when we feel the ABS engaging, either through the pedal, through the steering wheel, or you just see it on screen, we then modulate our braking pressure around this threshold, and that will give us the hardest braking possible. In cars without ABS to save you, you have to be more gentle and more careful. More gently building up the braking pressure until you can feel the tires working at their maximum capacity. Any overshoots or sudden movements you make on the brake pedal will most likely have you locking up, and a lockup is very hard to recover from while still making the corner. So in this sense, you are also threshold braking, but you don't have any ABS to actually save you if you mess up a little bit. When you have slowed down the car to an acceptable speed and you are in your desired gear, it is time to start steering into the corner. And this is of course the moment where we also start asking lateral grip from the tires. And so to actually make sure we don't just go straight, this is the moment where we have to start trailing off the brakes. And it is in this phase of the corner where the margins for error are extremely small, especially if you are really pushing and expecting your trailing zone to be perfect. If you brake a little bit too hard on corner entry, while the brake bias is set too far forward, you will just go straight. Well, if you brake a little bit too hard on corner entry with the brake bias set too far rearward, you will just spin out of the corner. And regardless of your brake bias setting, if you don't trail brake into the corner enough, you also will not make the apex. And then, as the car is turning in more and more towards the apex, you gently release more and more of the braking as well. Where for each few degrees of steering rotation you put on your steering wheel, you also feather off the brakes by a few percent until or just before reaching the apex. And the overall goal here is to go from 100% braking force in the braking zone to just 0% braking force barely before the apex, and having this curve be as smooth and gradual as possible. And then we have karting style braking. Almost every kart that is not a shifter kart will only have rear wheel brakes, and they use this as a tool to go quicker. In fast kinks and corners, they will use this technique to actually very quickly and rapidly lock up the rear axle, which then for a fraction in time will give the front tires a ton more grip than the rear tires, and they use this to their advantage to induce a controlled but very visible amount of oversteer, which they then use for extra rotation on corner entry. And this allows them to drive a tighter line with more speed. But even in a normal car, with a brake on each of its 4 wheels, we can still achieve the same effect. And while this effect is most visible and usable in small and nimble cars like the Mazda MX-5, it is still something you can use even in cars like the BMW GT3. And the technique is exactly the same as well. Just before corner entry, you give a very hard and aggressive stab on the brakes. This then will make the car pitch forward quite violently, and if we combine that with steering into the corner, we are essentially inducing oversteer, which we then can use to drive a tighter line at higher speeds as well. And then we have mid-corner braking for rotation, where maybe you just overshot your speed coming into the corner a little bit and you already know that you will not hit your apex. You can just give very gentle and small taps on the brake to both actually slow the car down a little bit more, but also give it a little bit more rotation. And as the car is already fully laterally loaded in this scenario, if you are not gentle, you will either just go straight ahead or you will spin out completely. I would say this technique is quite advanced and it is situational, but it will allow you to recover from situations where you would normally just simply miss the apex completely. And then we have coasting high in the rev range for engine braking. And we have already previously explained that the more revs your engine is doing, the more friction it is providing to the drivetrain. So in a rear wheel drive car you do your engine braking with the rear wheels, and in a front wheel drive car you do your engine braking with the fronts. And as engine braking is a completely passive thing you don't have to actively manage with your feet, it is an extremely useful tool to get a little bit of extra rotation in the corner and also to help it slow down a little bit more. And especially in rear wheel drive cars, it will allow you to overcome mid-corner understeer. And it is especially useful in cars without ABS, because judging how much you can actually trail brake is extremely difficult in these cars, and actually using the engine braking can be a very nice supplement to it. I hope this one is so obvious that you are basically facepalming at this point. But yes, in modern race cars with sequential gearboxes and with auto blipping, we brake with our left foot. This will allow us to more quickly go back on the throttle after braking. And I do want to get a little bit more in depth here, because at the highest level they are changing their brake bias all the time. That is mainly because, for example, at corners like Le Coulme at Spa, you generally want the brake bias to be as far rearward as possible to get maximum rotation. Let's just say we arrive at 47% front brake bias. In Bruxelles it will most likely be fine. In Jackie X No Name corner it will also most likely be fine. But once we start arriving at Poelhon or at Le Fine, we might notice that we are getting massive snaps of oversteer. And all this is to say that the quote-unquote optimal brake bias will change from corner to corner, and even condition to condition. And just to give some rules of thumb here, if you are either having front tire lockups, or we suffer from too much understeer when trail braking into the corner, we want to change our brake bias to be more rearward. If the car is unstable when braking in a straight line, or it is constantly trying to kill you when trail braking into a corner, you want to increase your brake bias more forward again. Now there is also of course a lot of interplay with how it works with the ABS systems, but in basically every sim I play, the ABS and electronic systems differ so much that there is nothing really smart I can say about this. You will just have to figure it out. Wow, we have made it to the end of part 1. I am proud of you. And I really hope you have learned something. Now, originally this video was planned to just be a single part, a single 1.5 hour video, but as it got longer and longer and I included more and more stuff, I have taken the decision to split it up into 2 parts. And I will be taking a short break from editing a lot of videos, simply because it gets a little bit overwhelming and I also have other stuff to do in my life. But I hope at least for now you will have a nice list of techniques and tricks you can actually go out and practice. And I also quickly want to get into my reasoning for setting up a Ko-Fi link. When I originally started with my Simracing for Beginners guide, I was basically just using whatever I had lying around. But after the insane reception to Block 1, I thought, you know what, maybe let's invest a little bit of money so it can become a little bit better and the quality of the content will also be a bit higher. And of course, as you can imagine, buying stream decks, microphone upgrades, microphones, lights, a camera, lenses, other recording equipment and accessories, a new graphics card so I can record in AV1, etc, etc, it simply becomes expensive. So, if you get any value out of my videos and you would like to support me, any donation is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. And with all of that said, from a very cold and snowy Groningen here, it's OSW out. I hope you all have a fantastic day.